Yeah, so today I'll jump straight into what is our topic. And it's going to be an action plan to spiritual health. So we're going to have a bit of a plan that we can work down to, work on our struggles and try and heal some things. So why is this been a big topic in my life recently? Because since coming back from South Africa, which was such a boost. It was really so lovely. And since then, I've continued the month in Proverbs challenge. So when we were in Cape Town, every day we read one chapter of Proverbs corresponding with the day of the month. And I really loved that idea. And Proverbs is full of wisdom. So I thought, yeah, might as well continue that. And there were just so many verses in Proverbs that stood out to me that were about health. So health in the natural sense, but also in the spiritual sense. And they also stood out to me, especially because I was talking a lot to my mum at that time. After coming back home from 8 months of traveling, it was really nice to catch up, and health is a big topic that she's really passionate about, and helping others along the road to healing, because she had it was hard for her because when she was 23, she lost her mum to cancer, and since then has been researching a lot and really been involved in that whole scene, which is, I find that quite inspiring. So that's what made me pay attention to those health proverbs. And another reason why I want to talk about spiritual health is a book I'm reading right now, which is called Revealing the Butterfly, Choosing Godly Transformation, from Sharon Prince. That's a sister from Auckland in New Zealand. And literally every chapter I'm reading from that book is just, I can just so relate to that. So I think it'll be really helpful for you as well. This book was written with girls and women of our hope in mind. So it's really super practical and talks about things that maybe aren't often talked about. So I just thought that was really brilliant. In particular, she tackles the issue of, she calls it comparisonitis. So it's like an illness that sabotages our spiritual progress because we will stop taking initiative, but because we doubt our worth, because we look to others and see them doing things better, so we compare ourselves and how we can stop that. So those are all themes that were in my mind, and this class was a brilliant opportunity to structure that a little bit and share that with you and brainstorm a little bit with you as well, about how we can see how our spiritual health really is right now. So that is what we'll be focusing on. How is our spiritual and mental health, and how can we heal spiritual illness in ourselves, and if we see someone else struggling, how can we support them? So for inspiration and to start off, I'd love to jump straight into what Proverbs has to say about health and the spiritual mindset. And these 6 verses all refer to health. So we'll look at the two verses of each stage. So we have 3 stages and 2 verses for each. So first we'll look at an unhealthy mindset. That is, I call that just illness, spiritual illness. And then we'll look at how to heal. So that is the second step, and our final step will be how can we maintain that health once we've healed from it, and how can we support others. So let's start with the first block about spiritual illness, and love to look at this verse. So do you want to turn up Proverbs 17 verse 22? Then we can have a look at that verse and see what's being talked about and how does that affects our spiritual health. So Liesel, I can see you've got your camera on. If you want to read that, that would be lovely.
So Proverbs 17, verse 22.
Verse 22, yeah.
I was actually quickly texting Henry to bring my actual Bible, which I can't go fetch because then the boys will see me.
Oh, good. Yeah, we'll have most of the verses on the screen. I can also
a
get
lot
like
of Proverbs, but anyway, I've got it. Here we go. 17:22. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones.
Yeah, perfect. So if we look at the second part of that verse, what state of mind is talked about? Do you have an idea?
The crushed spirit.
Yeah, perfect. So my version says broken spirit. And then the very last part of the verse is about how that affects our spiritual and mental health. So it's pretty clear. How does that affect the health? I might just go ahead and say it. In this verse, it says it dries the bones, which is an interesting description. So it says a broken spirit dries the bones. Okay, that's our first verse. We'll look at what that might mean later. Let's look at our second verse. So that's Proverbs 14, verse 30. I'll just give you all time to turn that up. Okay. Would anyone from Kempton Park like to read this one?
Yeah, I can read.
Thanks.
So it says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones.
Okay, great. So we'll focus again on the second part of the verse because we're on our illness block of our process. So what is the state of mind that's being talked about? Or the emotion in the second part of that verse. Yeah, that's right. So it's envy. And how does envy affect health?
Rots your bones.
Yeah, that sounds quite strange, doesn't it? So why all this rotting of bones? So we have a broken spirit dries the bones and envy rots the bones. So they both speak of bone decay, and I'm not a doctor, but I did some research on bone disease and how it shows up and how you can prevent it. So bone disease is called osteoporosis, and it's said to silently weaken your bones, which can make you more likely to experience a bone fracture or a broken bone. And most people don't know they have osteoporosis until it causes them to break a bone. So so the main points from this diagnosis of osteoporosis is first of all, it's the silent weakening. So you don't notice it, and it only becomes apparent once the bones break. And I was thinking, so how does this natural illness relate to spiritual illness of, for example, broken spirit or envy? And just in the same way that drying and rotting is a slow process that can be hard to notice, it can be the same with envy and brokenness. So a question to ourselves, we can ask ourselves is, are we aware if we are rotting with envy and brokenness? And if we don't check up on our spiritual health, it might get worse until the bone breaks and may cause burnout. And I thought this point was really interesting because last sisters class that I did on contentment, we had a good conversation there. And I think it was Carol had a really interesting point about you also can't just burn out for Jesus. That's also an issue. So you have to be aware of your spiritual health and how you monitor what you expect of yourself and how much you can give, and trusting God with the process. But yeah, the good news is the prevention is possible. Okay, so we'll just quickly summarize. So we've looked at the natural illness of bone disease because that was brought up in Proverbs. So there's a silent weakening, and that corresponds with the drying and rotting of bones. Like when our love kind of grows cold and slowly gets less. So does someone want to turn up Matthew 24 verse 12? We can have a look at the verse of how this can affect our spiritual health. So Matthew 24 verse 12.
I can read for us. Matthew
Sure.
24:12. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold.
Yeah, so this part, the love of many will grow cold, that's what this silent process can be likened to. Okay, so it might not be seen from outsiders, but just when something sudden happens, then it might be seen. So it's important that we search our hearts while we're in a positive frame of mind to prevent spiritual bone breakage later. So one other interesting aspect is this kind of disease, osteoporosis, is measured by X-ray. And it would be nice if we can turn up Psalm 139 verse 23 to look at how we can measure spiritual illness in our life. So that's Psalm 139 verse 23.
Kathy will read for us.
Okay, Psalm
Thank you.
139. Psalm 139 verse 23. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts.
Yeah. And I'll also add on verse 24. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so I think that's just the prayer we can pray if we want to find out what is our personal spiritual illness that we need to work on. Okay, so that was the negative part, because we have to look at the illness before we can actually heal it, right? But the good news is that prevention and healing is possible, and those beautiful verses in Proverbs really point that out. So I'll just repeat those verses that we had on our first slide. Proverbs 15 verse 30, good news strengthens the bones. And Proverbs 17 verse 22, a joyful heart is good medicine. So I've totally gone off my notes, but that's fine. Okay, so does someone want to point out how we can heal from these two verses? What are the recommendations that Solomon gives us?
Be positive and joyful.
Yeah, I love it.
Positive news.
Yeah. Good news. Yeah, exactly. That can come in different forms. So we'll look at what that means spiritually in a second, but we'll just continue developing our spiritual analogy of the bone disease, of the osteoporosis, and look at what the doctors say how you can heal osteoporosis. They say it's important to prevent bone disease that you get enough calcium or vitamin D in your diet, that you get enough physical exercise, and that you stop regularly drinking alcohol more than 2 drinks per day. And a bit more detailed prevention assessment says exercise and making sure you get enough calcium and vitamin D in your diet are usually all you'll need to prevent osteoporosis. Just a quick mention while we read this, just imagine how do these tips, how can they be translated into spiritual context of how to overcome envy or a broken spirit or any spiritual imbalance. So just think of how we can translate this, the natural prevention tips to the spiritual prevention tips. Okay, so we've read the first section about what you eat and that you exercise. Then the second section is about follow these general safety tips to reduce your risk of an injury. So if your bones are already getting fairly weak, make sure that you wear your seatbelts, wear the right protective equipment for all activities and sports. Make sure your home and workspace are free from clutter that could trip you or others. Always use the proper tools or equipment at home to reach things and never stand on chairs, tables, or countertops. Follow a diet and exercise plan that's healthy for you. Use a cane or walker if you have difficulty walking or have an increased risk for falls, okay? Sounds pretty obvious. So we've done this kind of translation from natural to spiritual for the disease and the progression, effect, and diagnosis. So let's do it for the prevention now. Does anyone have any ideas what verses or what spiritual concepts this exercise could be referring to? So if we feel like we are envious of someone or some other spiritual illness, how can we use these tips of prevention? Like, for example, firstly, exercise to get better spiritually.
So Kathy shared that we can meditate on God's word.
Yeah, definitely. What was the first part? Did you say vitamin D or?
No, that was our idea for pretty much getting into the Bible.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely link that with the second point. So I hope you can read that. It's a bit small, sorry. So calcium and vitamin D, that's something that goes into the body as part of your diet. So what environment are we putting ourselves in? Are we getting God's good news inside of us, the joyful good news of the kingdom? Wearing the right t-shirt for that one. Yeah, so, and then, oh, Carol, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was immediately thinking about where the Lord tells you, if you have anything against anyone, Mark 11:24-26. This is King James Version or New King James. Therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you'll receive them and you will have them. And whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your heavenly Father may also forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you your trespasses. But there's another one where it says, leave your offering at the altar and go make things right with your brother. And I dare say that is a very hard thing for most people to do. But if you have that in your heart to do, the older you get, it gets easier. But truly, putting our heart right with God and being honoring him in our thoughts, our words, our deeds.
Exactly. And not just preaching, but exercising it. And I think that's exactly the spiritual translation for that first point. We've got to exercise and do what, don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. And I also, that first section made me think of Hebrews 12 verse 1, where it says, run the race. And if we look at point 3, safety measures, protective equipment to prevent falling. I don't know if you have a verse in mind, otherwise I'll share one that I have in mind for this point 3 about protective equipment. How can we protect ourselves? I'll just share one. You can join me later to say more. But I love that verse about the armor of God. Put on the armor of God, the sword of the Spirit, the belt of truth and all of that kind of things that we can wear to protect us from from anything really. And also another beautiful verse is the armor of light, and I might just click to our next slide so that we have all those verses visualized. So if someone wants to turn up Romans 13 verse 12, and someone the Hebrews 12.
While they're looking that up, Psalm 119, 105 was a life verse for me. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And when you think about wellness and you think about all the equipment to be prepared so that you have walkers or whatever, truly the light, his light in our lives is a lamp and a light to our path, to you're not stumbling and falling.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So that's another thing. Turn on the light before you walk around, otherwise you'll definitely trip. Yeah, and get that light into your life. Get that word of God. Thanks. So
Right. But Celia, you can read Romans 13 verse 12.
thank you.
Romans 13 verse 12. The night is nearer over. The day is almost here. Let us stop doing the things that belong to the dark, and let us take up weapons for fighting in the light.
Very nice. Yeah. So that's the armor of light, which also sounds so intriguing, and that really fits with Carol's point about let that light into your life and clothe yourself with that light. And yeah, it's a consistent message all over the Bible. Isn't that lovely? So yeah, so if we want to move on to point 4, so that was the point about getting rid of clutter so that you don't fall. If someone's got Hebrews 12 open, feel free to read I think it's verse 1 and verse 11 of Hebrews 12.
Oh,
Verse 1 and 11.
Yes.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And verse 11, no discipline seems at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it.
Yeah, I think I might have just double typed the 1, but 11 is also a beautiful verse. So verse 1, that's just about throw away all, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. So just chuck off all the weights. And the other day, my dad and sister and I we went for a run, and it was quite long, and I was getting really tired, and I was carrying my bottle in one hand, and like I was wearing too many layers, and Dad just took some from me, and it made such a big difference, and it was so much easier then. So yeah, which leads us into our final point. Use supporting walking stick to lean on, and that walking stick can of course be our friends, and we can be that walking stick to others. We can bear each other's burdens, like Galatians 6 verse 2 says. Okay, I think we all get the point. We might move on then. Okay. So yeah, I hope this table has helped to summarize the whole kind of bone disease and spiritual health analogy. And that makes sense in your mind now. So we've looked at the potential of spiritual illness, so our first block of the process. We've seen how the disease progresses, how it can be diagnosed by searching our hearts by X-ray, and how it can be prevented. And we also touched on these 2 healing verses in the middle. And remember when we talked about the good news, and that it can be prevented. So the good news that we can actually prevent this illness or even heal if we've already experienced it. But now that's all quite theoretical. Let's delve deeper and get practical by creating an action plan for the complete healing process. So if you look at this, I hope you can see that. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, so if you look at the left column, we have our 4 steps. The 4 steps of diagnosing the illness and finding the root cause, which we just did. And then the healing part of praying for forgiveness, but also praying for future and for the planning of the healing. And then our next step is maintaining health and supporting others to prevent that. So on the top row, you can also see all the different fields of applications. So all the different spiritual illnesses that one could have. So that can range from impatience or not really having a prayer life, or starting to feel bitter, or all these kind of things are illnesses that grow slow. You don't even notice that they're actually there. But that's why it's so important to like diagnose them and work through them. And we're not going to do like fill out this whole table today, but the goal for today, and I pray that this will help, is that you find that your spiritual illness, where you are most prone to, where you struggle most, and that you can use these 4 steps and follow them, and find some verses that correspond with them to take little steps to improvement, instead of standing in front of this big mountain that's insurmountable. Okay, so I can send you that template later, and you can fill it in for you and make it personal to you, and stick it up in your room and remember your resolutions. Okay, so if that sounds a bit abstract, we're going to just walk through this whole spiritual temptation or illness action plan on specifically envy, because Proverbs talked about envy, and it's also a topic I personally wanted to explore. So for you might think envy, so yeah, we're focusing on overcoming envy and bitterness. For you might think envy is nothing you struggle with, and maybe not, but it's very amazing what Solomon has to say, and he didn't say that for no reason, that actually under the sun almost everyone is motivated by envy. So if we read this verse, Ecclesiastes 4 verse 4, I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to one person's jealousy or envy of another. And that's quite, humbling. So I wonder why that is. So let's go to our step 1 of our healing plan. Do you have any ideas why we envy, or why envy is such a prevalent emotion in our society? Well, always has been since Solomon's time and before. So if you have any ideas, just simple ideas why.
Our brain
Perhaps
go, Landy.
I was thinking that, I mean, it can go way back to the Garden of Eden with the idea that we are discontent. We're not happy with what we have. We always want more. Like Eve, wanted more than just what.
Yeah, 100%. And she wasn't happy anymore with all the fruits of the garden. Like they had all of those fruits, but then she saw that one and she compared the fruits that she had to, or they had to that other fruit, and they wanted that one. Hey, yeah.
And even babies, I mean, they're self-centered, and they let you know by screaming and hollering that, something's not right, you better fix it. And some people never get out of that phase. It's sad.
Yeah.
Self-centeredness.
Yeah, it's natural. It's definitely natural and needs to be trained away. Yeah, that's so true. Okay, there's more reasons, but let's move on and we'll talk about that later. I think the main issue, which mainly Lundy kind of touched on, is the subconscious root of envy is comparison. And actually 10%, more than 10% of thoughts are comparison. So every day we compare something or someone to ourselves and see how we stack up to that. And psychology says these days that comparison is human nature and a common part of human social life. It's normal to compare yourself to your past self, others in your age group, or online. Social comparison isn't all bad. It can help to set a baseline that can support growth. And to a certain extent, I mean, that's true, because we should look up to our spiritual role models. We should look to Jesus and imitate him and imitate God. But Paul also highlights the risk of unhealthy comparison, because that can lead to pride, so superiority or even inferiority. So let's read this verse. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. It is not wise when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves. So it is not wise and it is not helpful for spiritual growth if we adopt an unhealthy sense of comparison that is more than the natural looking up to someone, but actually tends to border on envy. So how do we discern unhealthy comparison? What is unhealthy comparison? And this book that I was telling you about touches on that topic, and she calls it comparisonitis. Sounds like a disease. It's when comparison runs away with you and gets the better of you, when you should be, as Zilandi said, content with what God has given you. So what is comparisonitis? Comparisonitis is looking to others for our sense of worth, validation and love. Comparisonitis is the analysis of how we stack up to how one should be, so the norm. And it is the greatest culprit for pride, so feeling superior to him or her. And it's also the greatest culprit for insecurities on the other end of the pendulum, when you feel like you could never be like someone. It might even be a spiritual comparison. Oh, she's so spiritual, I could never get there. And that's also not good. So that's when you start to feel inferior or envious. And based on those insecurities, you don't take up the initiative to actually do stuff. So in essence, it's a real thing, and I think everyone has it, but only God can fulfill our inner need for love and validation. And that's something we really need to understand and replace with that constant seeking validation from others around us. So we've looked at the root cause, which was our first step. So unhealthy comparison, gauging your worth by looking to others, is definitely the root cause of envy. And another one, if I think back to what Liesl said beforehand about the healing, you heal by being joyful and being good news. And does that mean in the first place you weren't joyful and you weren't grateful? So that's also something that can cause envy, because as soon as you stop being grateful, you see others having more and you're not happy anymore or joyful for what you have. So yeah, we've looked at the root cause. So yeah, just a quick little mention of ungratefulness while we're at it. This is the second subconscious root of envy. And it's just natural, because gratitude also needs training. Comparison needs detraining and gratitude needs training. I don't know what you call that, but anyway, you know what I mean. One needs to decrease, the other one needs to increase. So we need to, make space so that gratitude can come in. And I'll just quickly delve into what the book has to say about gratitude. In Sharon's book, she kind of paints a picture in what she writes of of a house, building your gratitude house, and that house needs to have a foundation. So the foundation for building thankfulness in our lives is scripture, like going into scripture regularly, prayer, and rest, because if we're not rested, we're not going to be able to focus on any of that. So getting a balance of that, and then building the walls that build up our house of gratitude are the structure that develops a habit of thankfulness. So that can be keeping a thankfulness diary, praising, like just singing out the songs, even if you really don't feel it, singing out those praise songs, and celebrating together with others, like actually celebrating God's goodness, and also perspective. So looking back on how God has answered prayers, how he will in the future, how his promises have always remained true. And once we've built up that foundation and those walls, we can top it off with a cherry on top, which is the joy that really lasts. So the rejoicing, being able to spread that joy and protect your own heart by it. And that way we'll stay strong against those waves like spiritual illness that can try to pull us down, which is grumbling and envy and dissatisfaction and fear and inferiority or superiority. Okay, so it's a lot of input. I don't expect you to take all of this in, but it's just, I found that super helpful, and maybe you found that as well. And I can also send slides later if you want to have another look at it. So we're on to our step 2 and step 3 of our plan. And I'll just walk us through that. So how are we healing? We need to understand God's view of us. We need to know we're valuable, loved, and we need to decrease the need to measure up to others. And we need to increase a thankful heart by building our little gratitude house and getting that foundation so that we can actually have a long-term thankful heart. And then how do we maintain that health? Philippians 4 verse 4 says, rejoice always. And Sharon in her book wrote that sometimes in the morning she wakes up and she just really doesn't feel like grateful or anything, and she just starts to sing even when she doesn't feel like it, and she goes for walks and asks God to show her more things she should be grateful for around her, and then the generic things turn into actually really amazing things, and it just changes your whole outlook and your whole day. So also, like we said, regularly plan to celebrate God and keep a joy diary. Look around for God's goodness and hang out photos or verses around the house to remind you of that, and remind others of that. So that's our final point. We want to think about how can we support others and strengthen them. How do we do that? Let's check back into Proverbs. Those verses that said what strengthens the bones. The bones that envy or comparisonitis had rotted. Remember we said it's the good news, so that can be the good news of a kingdom. The good news when a friend encourages you. It can be joy, so the gratitude for God's blessings, even in absolute terrible circumstances. Paul and Silas in prison, they were just singing it out. They were just so grateful, or like, what's the verse? Give thanks in everything, not just when you're feeling well. And then the last Proverbs verse about healing and strengthening the bones was pleasant words. So that's all about our friendships and how we can, what we say to each other and what God says to us in his word. And another verse was, the heart at peace gives life to the body. So we can cultivate that peace by taking those steps. So yeah, our final question is, how can we support the ill ones? Proverbs 18:14 says, a person's spirit can endure natural sickness, but who can survive a broken spirit? So let's ask ourselves, how can we support others when they're broken? So these 3 verses about pleasant words, joy, joyful heart, how can we make those applicable to us? So we've already looked at how that relates to us personally quitting envy. So pleasant words might be seeking advice from spiritual friends, reading of God's unique purpose for everyone, and that we are all valuable members of the body. Pleasant words also involves seeking community to maintain communication with others and cultivate that love so that we have things to be grateful for. Then the good news part of healing could mean putting yourself in an environment where you hear the good news of the kingdom, where you can shift your perspective, that nothing in this life really matters except for loving and serving God, and that God forgives, and that we should then focus on him and his forgiveness and how amazing that is. And the final point that Proverbs has about healing is the joy, and that we should replace comparison with gratitude, sing joyful praise even when we don't feel like it, pray out of happiness for God's goodness and blessings. So all of that is a repetition, but it's good. We need to cement the points in our minds. So how can we help a friend quit envy? So you might have heaps of ideas about this, and I'm just conscious of time, so I'll just run through what I had written down for that. And feel free to interrupt me and add. I'm more than happy to, hear what you have to say. Pleasant words might mean encouraging them to find their value in God and not in others' view. It might mean reading with them and encouraging them to take God's words to heart and making them personal, that God's actually speaking to them and wants to heal them. It means praying with them, and that is sometimes can be awkward if we've not done it much, but it's so valuable and so special and strengthens the relationship like nothing else can. The good news, how can we bring good news to our friends? Good news means putting their spiritual health first and being vulnerable, because that will make them maybe feel like they can be more open about their spiritual illness, and then you can build a better connection. If it's a friend who doesn't share the hope yet, maybe you want to hand out a Bible to them, or a Bible that you've already taken notes in and personalized for them. The joy aspect, then the final column here, in this part now, that could mean organizing some fun meetups to chat about important things in a casual setting and joyful setting, and just enjoying the simple joys of life together and figuring out what those are for you. Maybe that might be going for a walk, or listening to praise music, or stargazing. I mean, stars are there almost every night if there's no clouds. They're there every night, but yeah, that's it. Anyway, so let's fill out our very final bit of our action plan to overcome envy and comparison. So we're down here at number 4. Supporting others means igniting an appreciative attitude toward them, and praying for them and with them. It means reminding them that they owe it all to God. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we came into this world with nothing, and we'll go out of this world with nothing except for God and the hope that we've accepted from him. And like Jonah was he really grumbled when God took away the plant that had grown over him and that had given him shade. And God asked him, well, was it your right? Did you make that plant of your own strength? Did you put it there? No, I gave it. And Job had already understood that lesson. Job says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So in every situation, to celebrate God together and knowing his will is better than anything and perfect despite everything. So to summarize, it comes back to the summary we had last time as well, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love others as yourself. And if we love God, we will adopt this 4-step fighting spiritual illness action plan. And that's also a way we can love others best, because then we can have that capacity to motivate them, help them towards the kingdom. And that's the best gift and best love we could show anyone. So what I want to leave you with is just that you might, for yourself, maybe later when you have some more time, figure out what your personal struggle is, and walking through those steps, so that you feel that you can actually feel like, yeah, it's getting better, and God's in this, and He's forgiven me, and all of that kind of thing. So I made this little template that I can send you, that you can just fill in for yourself. And here are some more suggestions in the top. Here in the top, you see a row of potential spiritual illnesses, and this little thing, symptoms of contentment, that we talked about last time, also has a lot of factors in it that might be a spiritual illness for you. So for example, judging other people might be something, or being often initiating conflict or anything like that. So yeah, I can send slides if you want, and I can just really recommend reading this book. Yeah, as I said, some of these thoughts are from Sharon, and yeah, thanks for listening. I'll have this overview here